It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
These are the final seconds.
The lead in the fourth. Can they hold on to it?
That do or die time. And everything rides on one shot. But it isn't going to be that easy.
And it's a one-point game.
This is down to the wire.
They're going to try the three-point attempt.
One shot to take you to the top. One winner. This is clutch basketball. That's the NBA playoffs. That's game.
It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for tuning in. I am your host, Marcus Mosier. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosier. And joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCP. You can also check him out on the Best Coast Boys podcast. Landon, what's going on, sir?
Hey, Marcus, how's it going? It's Wednesday. It's the middle of the week. It's the toughest part of the week because you got to get over the hump. And the middle of the offensive line is what we're going to talk about today. It's the toughest part of the offensive line.
You are so good at these. It's absolutely ridiculous. So
the funny part is that I laugh because I always come up with them like in the intro while we're coming into this, and I'm always very self-satisfied with what I come up with.
Yeah. Good job, buddy. All right, let's talk about the Cowboys' interior offensive line. It's a very interesting position because you've got one established all-pro guy. You got let's say an average to maybe slightly above average starter. And then you've got basically an unknown at center. So I want to start with Zach Martin. My biggest question about Zach Martin for you, Landon, isn't about his play, because we know he's an absolutely dominant right guard. It's, are you concerned about some of these injury things, right? He was never really fully healthy last year. Are you concerned that we're getting to the stage of his career where he's always going to be a little nicked up?
I think from what you've seen with him, it's been a lot of nicks and bruises. And the funny thing is that he's never really had that so much throughout his career. He's been a pretty consistent guy. I mean, he's played, the most of the games. In fact, I think he had a little streak going for a little while of consecutive games started. It's something that happens to all players at a certain point. The father time catches up with them. I don't know if we're quite to the point yet where, you're going to expect it for him to miss X amount of games, like we were at a certain point with Tyron Smith, and we might still be, obviously. Yeah. So I think, it was definitely unusual last year to kind of start to see some of that creep into him a little bit and obviously miss games. But at the same time, you have to consider that you get injured when you really kind of overexert yourself. And Zach Martin was basically trying to hold this offensive line together by himself at a certain point. So I'm hoping with, a little bit more stability around him and less kind of desperation to make something happen. He can play a little bit more inside of himself and not get, nicked up as much, trying to like overexert himself, trying to, be a hero in the middle of that offensive line. I
still think he's only like 30 years old, which is actually fairly young for like a guard. So let's just hope it's a fluke thing. It seems like it kind of was. I think he got hurt. Was it in the Browns game? Maybe,
that sounds right. Yeah.
Around then. And then he had to play right tackle, and it seemed like that messed him up a little bit as well. So. Yeah,
that's something worth considering too. Is that he hadn't played tackle in X amount of years, and I don't think he had ever played right tackle.
No.
And so like whenever you are asked to do something that you're not normally comfortable doing, or you're asked to do something outside of your kind of normal functions as a football player, that's when the injuries happen, right? And whether it's Zach trying to exert himself too hard to try to be a hero on that offensive line, or having to play a right tackle position that he's not normally playing, or hasn't played in a long time, or has very little experience in, or in this case both, right?
Yep.
Like
Yep.
it definitely could be a recipe for disaster, and unfortunately, it did end up resulting in him getting nicked up a little bit, and hopefully that's not what's going to happen this year. Hopefully he'll play with have a little bit more opportunity to play consistently the way he's comfortable, and that'll mean less wear and tear.
All right. I actually want to move on from Zach Martin because he's the least interesting thing about this offensive line, right? Because he's so good.
We know who he is. Yeah.
We know what he is. We know what he can do. We know that if he's healthy for 16, 17 games, he's going to give you all pro level production. That's fantastic. It's everything else that's a question mark. I want to talk about Connor Williams, Landon, because I feel like this is maybe the player that Cowboys Nation in general and I disagree with the most, because I think the general thought on Connor Williams is he's an average to maybe slightly below average guard. And it seems like a lot of people want to replace him and that he's the biggest he's the weakest link on this offensive line. I don't see that at all. I think last year he played the best football of his career. I think he's an ascending player, right? He's going into year 4. It's also important to remember, like, he was coming off a late season torn ACL after the 2019 season. So,
yes.
I think he's just fine as your left guard. What are your thoughts on Connor Williams entering 2021?
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people's, got bad impression, got bad taste in their mouth by his play in week 1, when, like you mentioned, he was coming off of a shortened recovery time off an ACL injury and then having to face Aaron Donald, So I think if you watch what he did throughout the season, I think it's obvious to call him the most consistent offensive lineman on this team last year, because he was the only one who probably played all 16 games or even close to it. So, yeah. And so that's that. I think that there's something. I think his play last year was better than most people give him credit for. And I also think that there's some value for him, a guy who, ultimately was drafted as kind of the final piece of a 5-man offensive line when he came into the league. Mm-hmm. And then, as things happen, you lose Frederick and things shift a little bit. And then he comes into this year, a year where he's supposed to take this big leap, but he's coming off an ACL injury. He's got injuries all around him. All of that considered, he went through last year through a lot of adversity. And was, like I said, at certain points, the only stable piece of this offensive line, which is crazy when you think about the people that are on this offensive line. So the fact that he was able to get through that and on the other side and play the way he did by the end of the season, I'm excited to see where he is coming into this year. I mean, I think that there's an opportunity for him to kind of take a little bit of a jump, simply because he's gotten more experience. He's now a year further away from that injury. And I think that there's two ways that you're either going to sink or swim after a season like last year for Connor Williams. And I think that just based on what we saw from him last year, especially near the end of the season, he was getting better. And I think that's there's more opportunity for him to have gotten better over the offseason. And I just based on what we saw from his, him facing adversity last year, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him be even a step above where he was last year coming in.
All right, so a couple things on Connor Williams. We talked about the ACL. He should be, 2 years removed basically from that now, so that should help. He actually just turned 24 in May, so he's still incredibly, incredibly young. The thing about Connor Williams coming into the NFL lane, and if you remember, was a lot of people thought he needed to add weight and kind of grow into his body, right? And we knew that was going to take 2, 3, 4 years to do. We're now at that 4th year stage, right? So it wouldn't shock me at all if he does have a career year. I also want to mention our friends at Pro Football Focus, right? Like, you might not agree with everything that they post for grade-wise, but it's pretty important to note that they've graded him significantly better every season that he's been in the NFL. In 2020, he graded out as the 16th best guard in football. And you might be thinking, well, that's not great. There's 32 teams, and there's two starting offensive linemen, 2 starting guards for every team, plus all these guys that get injured. So if you're inside the top 15, 16, that's not bad. So, I mean, I'm going to really quickly, before we go on to somebody else, I think it would be wise for the Cowboys to lock up Connor Williams now before he has an even better season, get some more stability there on the offensive line. Would you be opposed to the Cowboys looking to extend Connor?
I wouldn't. simply, because, and we'll talk about Connor McGovern here in a second. I don't know that I don't know what your other options are at this point. I mean, other than to go into the draft and try to find another offensive lineman or maybe sign, a vet free agent that you like.
So I think here's the thing. You let's say that you let that happen, right? You're hoping to find somebody in the second round that's as good as Connor Williams.
Yeah. I mean, that's the truth. I think that the Cowboys, if they can afford it, they should do it. Simply because, like I said, I think they drafted Connor McGovern with the idea of having some flexibility here and maybe having some competition. I don't know that even Connor McGovern is going to be competing for a starting job at training camp. I mean, I think it sounds like Connor Williams is firmly entrenched in that job. And if that's,
we'll talk about Connor McGovern, but I think it's more likely he's competing for the swing spot than a starting spot, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that shows you kind of where they think Connor Williams is. And so, yeah, offensive line is a position that is clearly not so easy to find and not so easy to develop. And if Connor Williams is willing to take a kind of a sweetheart deal before he really kind of breaks out, I think the Cowboys should jump on it simply because of the lack of quality depth of offensive line in the NFL. And I think the Cowboys experienced quite a bit of that last year after a rash of injuries. So, I certainly am not opposed to it. I think that, like I said, I expect him to maybe take a step this year. So signing him before he does and shows that probably wouldn't be the worst idea. And, it gives you a little bit more kind of long-term security on this offensive line when you look at La'el Collins, you look at Tyron Smith, and right now you don't really know exactly what their 2 to 3 year plan is. Right now we're just hoping to see what happens for this season. Signing Connor Williams would give you kind of a little bit more stability and a guy that potentially, if you needed to, in a pinch, you could swing him out to tackle. You can swing him back out to tackle and play him there if something happens with La'el or Tyron Smith. So I like Connor Williams. I like that, he's developed and he's gotten better every year, like you just mentioned. And I think the fact that he has some versatility to his game, like Zach Martin, in the sense that he's played tackle before. He knows. But I think that has value as well. And if the Cowboys re-signed him, I wouldn't bat an eye.
All right. Using over the cap's valuation, you tell me just really quickly before we go into break, which one of these players you would take at this amount of money? Connor Williams at $8 million a year, Randy Gregory at $10 million, or Michael Gallup at $12 million?
I think I have to see how the season plays out a little bit more because
what a cop out.
My immediate answer is Randy Gregory because I'm concerned that what's the pass rush situation if DeMarcus Lawrence starts to kind of creep back to regression and starts getting older. And
my philosophy though, spend the money on offense. It's more stable, and then draft defense, right? Like I think I would rather keep the offensive line intact and spend picks on the pass rushers than the other way around.
I understand that to a certain degree, but I also think that the other aspect of that is how easy is it to develop these positions. And offensive line and defensive pass rusher, I think, are similar in that it's harder at times to kind of just pop them in and have success. So, I think it's not easy. Like I said, my initial thought was Randy Gregory just because of the lack of the pass rush talent necessarily we would have at that point. But I mean, I could certainly be talking to Connor Williams at that price.
All right, let's take a quick break so I can tell you guys about BetOnline, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. Baseball season is in full swing, and you can track all the action on BetOnline. Get the latest news, odds, and info on all your sporting needs, including MLB, NBA, NHL, and UFC. Before the next pitch, head over to BetOnline on your laptop or mobile device and check out all the great sporting news, sign-up bonuses, and contest information. Don't sit on the sidelines anymore, as this is your chance to get into the game as teams prep for the runs of the playoffs. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts.
Support for this podcast comes from Invent Together. According to studies, less than 13% of all inventors who hold a U.S. patent are women. Black and Hispanic college graduates patent at half the rate of their white counterparts. But we can fix that by increasing participation in innovation and patenting by underrepresented groups. It would quadruple the number of American inventors and increase annual GDP by almost $1 trillion. Invent Together is a coalition of organizations, companies, universities, and concerned citizens committed to ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to invent and patent. Because the more diverse the American patent system gets, the stronger and more successful our nation will become. What can you do to help diverse inventors patent and unleash economic opportunity? Find out at inventtogether.org. Learn more and take action today.
I saw you watching golf yesterday, Landon. I'm sure you were using BetOnline to place your wagers, right?
I was making huge wagers on whether or not was it Aaron Rodgers that was playing golf yesterday for some reason.
Former Packer quarterback. Yep.
Beat Tom Brady. Yeah, former Packer Aaron Rodgers. I'm shocked that people got fooled into watching golf yesterday. That's
it's not fool. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was great. All right, we're not talking about that though. We're talking about interior offensive line, and I want to talk about Tyler Biadasz, another Wisconsin guy. Tyler Biadasz had a very up and down rookie season. I thought at times he looked really, really good. There was also some games in which he struggled. So entering year 2, it appears that Tyler Biadasz is the clear-cut starting center for the Cowboys. How do you feel about that?
Your description of his season is a lot like my description of my golf game, ironically enough. I think I think going into the season, we had hoped and anticipated that Tyler Biadasz would find a way to take that job from Joe Looney early. I think we all like Joe Looney and think he's a personable guy. Mm-hmm. He served an admirable job at center when Frederick went down at certain points early on with the syndrome, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and I think that. But the thought process was when Tyler Biadasz got drafted that hopefully he would be able to earn that spot and be an improvement. At the starting center position going into last year. Mm-hmm. COVID happened, OTAs happened. That didn't quite, get developed the way that we all had hoped and anticipated. But opportunity still knocked for him a little bit later in the season as injuries started to pile up, and he got in, and I think that he played admirably. And then as he was playing more and more, he was playing well.
Yes, he was.
And he clearly started to kind of the light switch came on for him, and he seemed comfortable with what he was doing, and at least with what they were asking him to do, it didn't feel out of place. And I think that we don't really know, how much in charge he was of making line calls versus Dak, and it wasn't Dak, it was Andy Dalton at large portions. But I think that the point is that the initial aspect of getting him on the field and getting him comfortable playing in an NFL game, that part's done. Now it's about him becoming more of a student game. Center is such a cerebral position. You have to know the calls. You have to know the alignments, and how you're blocking it up in the run game. You got to know how to assign jobs in pass protection and know all the pass protections, obviously inside and out, and know how to make all the adjustments. So there's certainly a mental aspect to this game that he's really going to have to get a grip on. And that's not to say that he has it. That's just the reality of the position. So the fact that he got some opportunity to get some snaps last year, I think was good for, again, just the physicality of knowing what the speed is like, knowing what the physical requirements are for you to be able to function on an NFL field. And then that helps him kind of set his offseason strength goals and speed goals and that sort of thing. And then the other aspect for him, again, is a lot of study. And I, you heard it, I think, in an interview with him, when they were interviewing guys during minicamp, that he spent a lot of time this offseason with Dak, which is great. He spent a lot of time over at his house and just kind of, they would talk about how they view things and how they see things. And that's really, really important because if you remember, the conversations that Frederick and Dak and Frederick and Romo had, it was all about making sure that the quarterback and the center both saw the defense the same way so that the line calls got made correctly. So Biadasz has got a lot on his plate this offseason. And I don't think we talk about it enough because I think it's it's a foregone conclusion that he's coming in as the starter, and I think that it is a foregone conclusion that he'll come in as the starter. Yep. But I do think that we should also recognize the difficulty that it is to kind of step in as a year 2 player and starting an offensive line like this.
Again, need to provide some context here for Tyler Biadasz. The reason why he fell to the end of the 4th round was due to an injury, right?
Yeah,
and there were
absolutely.
some concerns that he might not be able to play right away, right? Well, the Cowboys had a shortened training camp. They had no preseason, and then Tyler Biadasz has to come in and play. And then when he did play, Landon, I believe he had 6 starts. I'm looking at it now. Here's the quarterbacks that he played with: Dak, Andy Dalton for a half, Ben DiNucci, Garrett Gilbert. That's
right. He was there for the Gilbert game.
So it was all, basically playing with 4 different quarterbacks and playing with guys that are rotating in and out at guard and tackle next to him, plus going up against some pretty good defensive lines like Pittsburgh and some Arizona. A lot was going wrong for Tyler Biadasz, and yet I think he still kept his head above water for the most part. I think he is somebody who could take a monster leap in year 2, just because it seems like things have settled around him a little bit. Like both guards are coming back. The tackles are coming back. He's coming back with a quarterback that should help him a little bit more. He's going to get significantly more snaps in practice and in preseason. I just think we're in for a big Tyler Biadasz season. And frankly, the Cowboys need him to be really good.
Yeah.
Like if this offense wants to be top 2 or 3, they're going to need the interior of the offensive line to be good, and they're going to need Biadasz to be good.
Yeah, and I think you put in even better context there. And if I remember correctly too, he started a couple games, and then Joe Looney got healthy, and I think they swapped them back, didn't they?
Well, remember there was a game just to show you how ridiculous their season was. Tyler Biadasz got hurt. He pulled his hamstring like walking.
That's right, in practice tunnel. Or something. Yeah,
no, it was walking. They were ready for the week, and he was walking to the out of the tunnel onto the field. And he pulled his hamstring.
I thought it was like the last rep or so. It was something dumb, but yeah, I was walking out of the tunnel. That's right.
So like you have your starting center get hurt as you're about to take the field. It was just a disaster season for so many different reasons, and that kind of sums it up. I want to talk about some of the reserves that the Cowboys have on this team, because it's very important that they have some quality depth. But before we do that, I want to tell you guys about Built Bar, the absolute best tasting protein bar out there. It's hard to even explain it. Real chocolate with amazing flavors. It's just a great combination of low calories, high protein, and low sugar with no crazy additives. Best of all, they taste absolutely fantastic. Go to BuiltBar.com and use promo code LOCKEDON, and you'll get $10 off your next box at BuiltBar.com.
This episode is brought to you by HP Plus. In a world full of smart devices, shouldn't your printer be smart too? It is with HP Plus. These printers know when they're running low, so you always get the ink you need delivered right when you need it. Plus, you save up to 50% on ink, so you can print whatever you want, as much as you want, anytime you want. Huh, that is pretty smart. Get 6 free months of instant ink when you choose HP Plus. Conditions apply. Visit hp.com/smart for details.
All right, Landon, we're going to take like a minute on each one of these guys. Connor McGovern, entering year 3, only played a handful of snaps last year. What are you expecting from McGovern?
I really have no idea, honestly. I think what we saw last year was okay at times, but he played like he was a rookie. He has some natural talent, but I saw a lot of waist bending. I saw a lot of technique stuff that felt like it needed to kind of be cleaned up. I think that he has upside that could make him a starter. I think it's not all there, and he's had such a disjointed career so far in these 2 years. Obviously, basically getting a red shirt his rookie year, and then last year kind of just being still kind of dealing with injuries, and then kind of being yo-yoed in and out of healthy, and then finally getting some playing time and kind of playing okay. But again, it's all in the context of the fact that he was surrounded by all these backups as well, and that he was playing amongst a second offensive line that was going against NFL first team defensive lines in a lot of these games. So it's hard not to get. I think Connor McGovern is one of the guys that it's hardest not to get that 2020 taste out of your mouth, right? Because that's the only real snaps we've seen of this guy so far. And this is a 3rd round pick. This was a guy that, we were told was a red blinking light, when he got drafted. So, expectations were high for him when he got on the field. and he was okay, not great. And I think that there should be an expectation of a jump this year. And if there isn't a jump coming into this year, I think you start to have some concerns about whether Connor McGovern is really going to kind of be the sort of player that you had hoped for when you drafted him in the third round.
Connor McGovern has taken 0 preseason snaps to the Cowboys in 2 years.
Yeah,
I mean, he just doesn't have a lot of work in. Basically got hurt right away in 2019 in training camp, so missed all that training camp. Then again, Cowboys had 9 training camp practices last year, and who knows how many he even practiced then. So
yeah,
he's a big unknown. I think there are some encouraging things about him. Like I think in the Minnesota game, he played pretty good. Even in the Ravens game, I think he handled himself well. But there was other games throughout the year where he really struggled. The Eagles game was one of them. I think he's somebody that I'm really curious to see in training camp and preseason how he looks. Did he change his body? Does he feel more comfortable? Because they're going to need him. 2 more guys. Brandon Knight making the transition from tackle to guard. I don't see a guard. I see a tackle. But what say you?
I think he can play guard if he needs to. I mean, I think he needs to put on maybe a little bit more weight, just to kind of solidify himself and maybe anchor a little bit better. But Brandon Knight is an absolute tough guy and a smart player and a guy who I feel like is just, kind of an old school offensive lineman type. You could line him up wherever and he'll, take a punch from whatever defensive lineman you've got across him and he'll stand his ground. He wasn't fantastic as a tackle. A lot of it was because he was injured, but I think he played as well as anybody else did as far as the backups there. And I think at guard, maybe it helps if he can get some better strength. It kind of helps lessen the blunt of some of his weaknesses, which include, kind of not being the most elite athlete, despite being pretty good mover for a guy his size and play style.
And the guy that he's likely to compete with for, a spot in this roster is Matt Farniok, who the Cowboys took, I believe, in the 7th round from Nebraska. Can play center, can play guard. I believe he even has a little bit of tackle experience. If you had to bet on one of these guys making the roster, which one would you pick?
Man, it's tough. I mean, if it's only just one of them, it might be Farniak. I mean, just because they'll like their draft picks. I don't know that Farniak
though. That's what gives me a little bit of pause.
I agree, and I if Connor McGovern takes a step or two, then I think it's probably him. But if he doesn't, if he just still kind of is just lingering, Brandon Knight is like. Brandon Knight will force you to keep him on the team just because
he's the perfect last guy to have on your roster.
Yeah, and I think that I think that if no one will take that job from him, then he'll have it. But I also think that Farniak is a Nebraska offensive lineman. He's a 2-time captain, so he's got skins on the wall. He's played a lot of football in a lot of different positions, and you know how coaching staffs are. They like their guys, and they drafted this guy. They didn't draft Connor McGovern. They didn't sign Brandon Knight. So there may be some bias there, and if everything's tied goes the runner for Farniak, I think. So otherwise, if not, Brandon Knight to me seems like the perfect swing guy, just because. Yeah,
that's
you're right.
For me. I'd rather have the guy that can play tackle in a pinch, right? And maybe Farniak can. Maybe we'll see it in preseason, but I've at least seen Brandon Knight play multiple games at tackle, left tackle in the NFL. Yep. Give me that guy. I've got a feeling that you could probably stash Farniak on the practice squad, being a 7th-round pick, especially if he doesn't play a ton in the preseason. That's kind of the way I lean. But again,
if he has a good training camp,
if he has a good training camp and he looks competent, we know how much the NFL loves even semi-competent offensive linemen. The Cowboys might have no choice. That is it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, you can download and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Continue to support us on YouTube. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Cowboys. You can follow Landon at McCoolBCB, and I'm at Marcus_Mosier. We will see you next time.